Okay, awesome. We'll get going. Hello and welcome to Waterton Glacier Science and History Week, everybody. My name is Dylan Frank, and I'm a Public Outreach Education Officer here in Waterton Lakes National Park. I want to thank you for joining us today as we explore recent results from scientific research and conservation efforts in Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. In the late 1970s, both Waterton Lakes and Glacier National Parks were recognized as biosphere reserves by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, a program that promotes working cooperatively with surrounding communities to conserve the ecological and cultural components of the landscape and to provide areas for ecological research both within and adjacent to the biosphere regions. We want to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Siksika-Tsitapi, Kootenai, Salish, and Quilespe people, whom we recognize as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. We honor with gratitude the people who have cared for this land throughout the generations and continue to maintain enduring connections to their traditional territories. This is our second day of a 4-day webinar series. Each day at noon, we are bringing you a new presentation highlighting current research and conservation topics related to Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. We are excited to bring some of the latest findings selected from the work of dozens of researchers conducting scientific and historical studies here in the heart of the crown of the continent directly to you. The presentation will last about 35 minutes with about 5 to 10 minutes allotted for questions at the end. You can click the chat icon at the top of the screen to open the chat box and type your questions at any time during the presentations. Note that your questions and comments will be visible to all participants. You can also wait to ask your questions at the end of the presentation. We will address as many questions as we can at that time. To improve your presentation view, you can click the triple dot More icon and select Full Screen to enlarge the view window and Focus on Content to hide the speaker boxes. For live captioning, click the triple dot More icon at the top of the screen and select Turn on Live Captions from the drop-down menu. Today, we are featuring the presentation titled The Half-Moon Hairstreak Butterfly Recovery Project in Waterton Lakes National Park, led by Dr. James Glasier, Conservation Population Ecologist at the Calgary Zoo. James leads the Half-Moon Hairstreak Butterfly Recovery Project in Waterton Lakes National Park. He studies the natural history and distribution of this endangered butterfly, so it may survive for future generations to observe and to enjoy. Passionate about scientific discovery, James received a Bachelor of Science in Paleontology and a Master's of Science in Conservation Biology from the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Wanting to learn and discover more, he then traveled to Australia to study for his PhD in biology from the University of New South Wales. For both his graduate degrees, he focused on ants and insect ecology. He then returned to Canada from Australia and has focused his studies on biodiversity, conservation, and biological interactions. And now we'll turn it over to James.
Thank you very much for that introduction. You guys can all hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yep. Okay, excellent. So thank you again, Dylan, for that introduction. And I'm here to present to you all about the Half-Moon Hairstreak Conservation Project in Waterton Lakes National Park. This project is a collaboration between the Wilder Institute, Calgary Zoo, Parks Canada, and also assisted by the University of Alberta Genetics Department, headed by Dr. Felix Sperling. The half-moon hairstreak, for those of you who don't know, is a small silvery brown butterfly pictured there. It's about the size of $1, and so it's very small. And it's not as flashy as some butterflies, but it is pretty cute with its big eyes, little antennae, and the silvery wings make it very cute. When it opens up, it's brown inside, so it's not super flashy, but it's a very cute little butterfly. As a caterpillar, the caterpillars feed on lupins. Lupins are lots of people know what a lupin is, but you can see the adults there on the lupin. And they are also myrmecophilous. That means they associate with ants. And I'll delve deeper into what that means in a few minutes. As adults, they feed on the nectar from buckwheat, mostly yellow buckwheat, Erigonium flavum, and a few other species of flowers such as goldenrod, so solidago, yellow asters, and sometimes yarrow. They seem to prefer very yellow plant flowers. As adults, they have a very short lifespan, only about 12 days, but usually even less than that, 6 to 8. So they live fast, short lives. They actually spend most of their existence as an egg. They get laid in late July or August, and they spend 7 months as an egg and then hatch in the spring, which then they spend 3 to 4 months as caterpillars feeding on the lupins. So it's kind of a unique kind of thing to study because you only have as adults a short time, a few days to actually study the butterfly, and then as you need to study the other life uh, stages for you to understand what is happening with this insect. So the half-moon hairstreak has a range that actually is found in Western North America, both in the United States and Canada. And you can see in the shape of a cat right there, that is the range of the half-moon hairstreak. It reaches into two populations into Canada. The one is the tail that goes up into BC. That's the Osoyoos Valley. It kind of reaches just a little north of Osoyoos near Penticton. And then we have this disjunct population in Waterton Lakes National Park. It is an isolated population, probably a remnant for when this had a larger range at one time thousands of years ago. And it is 500 kilometers about from any other known population. So it's a highly isolated, unique population that is the main focus of my study. So the Waterton population was first recorded by park naturalists in 1923. It's of course been there for thousands of years, and has gone relatively understudied. But in 2017, a fire went through the habitat and burned 50% of the fan. So where the lives is this nice flat grassland area. 50% of the habitat was burned, and Parks Canada went, "Uh-oh, what about the half moon?" So they did a survey in 2018, and they only found 6 butterflies. Sorry, and so in 2000.
We've lost your audio, James.
Yeah, we still can't hear you there, James. No, I heard a sound right there really quick, but still not much.
About now.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know why that's happening.
No worries.
Okay, so can you tell me where it stopped? I apologize.
You're on the first recorded in the park in 1923. I think you were just right around that part.
Okay, so it was first recorded in 1923, and in 2017, a fire went through the habitat, pictured here, and burned 50% of the habitat. And so Parks Canada went, "Uh-oh, what about the half moon? You know, a lot of its habitat burnt." And so they did a survey in 2018 and only found 6 butterflies. So they again went, "Uh-oh, there's only 6 butterflies. We need to figure this out." And so they reached out to the Wilder Institute, Calgary Zoo, and the collaboration for this project began. So in Canada, both populations, the one in BC and the one in Alberta, is ranked as endangered. And there are 4 main recovery strategies that we have to take into account when we do this project. One of them is identification of critical habitat, where it's found and why. Determine the quality of habitat required for the population to exist. So what habitat parts are needed. Determine possible antassociations because the larvae are myrmecophilous or have been reported to be myrmecophilous, and how important that means. And then assess threats. So what kind of threats are happening that may be reducing the population. However, in Waterton, we have a few extra objectives because it's such a small population. It may have been reduced from the fire. So we're doing habitat assessment as required. Assessment of the life history is important for us to figure out what that might mean for it when a fire goes through or other types of disturbances. And we're also investigating translocation and rearing techniques. And what translocation means is taking individuals from a different population and adding them to a current one, or taking them from the current population, rearing them outside of that population, and then reinforcing the population for the future. So that's what translocation may mean, and we need to understand how to rear these butterflies to do that. We're also collecting genetic samples from Waterton, the United States, and British Columbia to help inform if wild-to-wild translocations are important or not. I've already pointed out that this population is disjunct, it's separated from the rest of the populations. So we need to know, are they closely related, or is this a very unique genetic population that if we were to introduce individuals from somewhere else, that could technically ruin or pollute that population and cause problems. So we need to know that before we do any type of translocation in the future. And we also want to assess other sites to set up, maybe we want to do a translocation of Waterton individuals to a secondary site in assisted colonization so that we have a backup population just in case there's more issues. So before we do that, we need to assess the threats to the half-moon. And I've already told you it's isolated, so there's no reinforcement butterflies coming through. There's no extra individuals supporting this. It's just what we have. And to make matters worse, this butterfly is only found in a small area, an area of less than 3 kilometers squared. And that's on this top picture. All of that is the Blakiston Fan, where the butterfly is found. And everything that is untreed is where the butterfly is found. It's not found anywhere else in Waterton Lakes. And so that means this small area is very important, but it also means that natural disasters have a huge impact on it. So the fire, this is a picture right after the fire, 50% of it burned, that reduced the population of half-moons. But other disturbances, there's a creek that runs through, so flooding. Weather, severe weather could have an effect on the half-moon. So there are a lot of different natural disasters that could impact this area, and that's why setting up a second population might be beneficial. Human disturbance is also a big threat. There are 2 roads that actually go straight through the fan for people to park and go hiking. There's horse trails that people take to do horseback riding, and then there's also a road that goes along the north side of the fan that allows for cars to get to the Waterton town center. So there's a lot of different human disturbances. And in the past, there was also a large swath of the eastern part of the fan was actually hayed for the horses for the park staff in the early 1900s. So there's a lot of different disturbances happening here. The last disturbance, and this is a big one, is the invasive species, the spotted knapweed, which is pictured down below. It's a beautiful pink flower that has taken over the fan and grows in high densities. So it outcompetes other plants for resources. And then it also does another thing where it actually poisons other plants with its roots. And so it can be in high densities on the fan, and it can cause a lot of problems. And you can see this density right here is pretty common in different parts of the fan. Now, Parks Canada is doing a lot to try and restrict this. They have teams that go out and pick them by hand. They spray them with herbicide. They have doing experiments using seed collectors to reduce the reseeding. And then they also have released a native or a natural herbivore, a type of weevil that's eating the seeds of the plant. So there's a lot of different things that Parks is doing to try and reduce the spotted knapweed, but it is still a big issue. So what we need to do to understand what the butterfly is doing is we need to do habitat assessment. So this is a picture of the fan, and what we use to monitor the different types of habitat that's here. And you can see each of these lines, the black and the brown, are transects. We have over 150 transects that we walk at least twice a year, where we monitor things like plants, the adults, and the larvae. and we map them out. And you can kind of see there's different colors, so there's different classifications. The light green is the like native shortgrass prairie. The darker green is a shrubbier areas. The blue is older, larger creek beds, and this kind of medium green color is where they had the hayfield, where it's a longer grass prairie now. And so it's important to understand those different types of habitats to understand what the half moon is doing on this small area. So what field techs get to do is they get to go out there, and I get to help, of course, and they get to count lots of different plants. But here they get to count lupins. There's 2 species of lupins on this fan, the silvery and the silky, and they get to count them and mark them on their map. And you can see here it's a very high density amount of lupins. Pictured here is a silvery lupin. It's shorter, but it's got a lot of different stalks, and so it grows very vigorously in lots of bunches, while the silky lupin actually has just a few stalks and grows a little taller. And so this is important because it'll allow us to understand where the larvae are using their host plant and what parts of the fan those larvae are found on. The next is mapping the nectar plants. So this is yellow buckwheat, Aragonium flavum, and you can see that it's more restricted to the southern part, southwestern part of the fan, especially right down on the lower south part. And that's again important because this is the main food source for the half-moon hairstreak. And so it's really important for us to understand where it's being used. And we take all these variables and we'll be able to model what is important. And then when we're assessing other sites, we might be able to use that model to predict if that site's good enough. And then another thing we did this year is we started mapping the geology and grain size of the fan. In this picture, you can see lots of different rock sizes and soil sizes. You can see right here, this is an old stream bed along the top right there with a small fir tree that's trying to grow. And then there's some larger boulders. And while we were counting and looking for larvae, we noticed that larvae were never found in these rocky areas. They were found in more of the sandy areas. And this is probably because even though there were lupins in these areas, there weren't ants. And so we need to understand what types of geology are playing a role on where the half moon might be located, because again, this might play an important role if we were to do any assisted colonization to other sites. So for population monitoring, we walk these transects and we do density of larvae along the transects, and we do point counts of adults at different parts of the year. And you can see in this picture that the larvae are the green dots, and the red are the adult dots. And so the green dots are focused on slightly different areas than the red. So when they're larvae, the half moons are using a slightly different part of the fan than the adults. And you can see where they used to have the hayfield, they hardly use at all. And so this is telling us that the native short grassland in the southern part, where there's lots of buckwheat, is where the adults seem to try and stay, and where there's lots of lupins on the northern part of that area is where the larvae seem to be laid. And that also means that the adults are moving up to that area to lay eggs, and then they're moving back to the Aragonium areas to gain nectar. So this tells us a lot about habitat use and what parts of the fan we need to protect and manage to ensure the population persists. Now, the larvae are really cute. They're these small kind of greeny red colored individuals. This one here is a first instar, so it's just hatched out of its egg a few days before being taken a photo of. And when we're doing the monitoring, we're actually down on our hands and knees. We have to use knee pads. We're moving the lupin leaves away because these larvae, these caterpillars, only hang out at the very base of the lupins, and they feed directly on new growth that's coming out, the new buds. They don't like older buds, and so they're very particular on what they eat, and they're very specifically located. And they're also, when we're when we've been looking, they're 100% found with ants all the time. So there's a high degree of association with ants. And so I'll show you this really cool video we got. There are two individual half-moon larvae, one there and one there. And then there's 3 ants, and I'll play the video. And you can see the ants, they're crawling on the larvae. They're cleaning the larvae and using their antennae to go at a gland right there where the ants' antennae are. And what that does is when the ants do that cleaning, the larvae excrete a really sweet substance called honeydew that the ants will eat. And then, so in return for getting food from the larvae, the ants protect the larvae. They protect them from predators, from parasites, and they also provide shelter. So when a half-moon larvae is disturbed, they'll actually go down into the ground, into the ant colonies for protection. And so this is a very important finding because with 100% rate of association, this exact species, Lasius ponderosae, and the half-moon hairstreak have a symbiotic relationship, which is obligate. It means they need it to survive. And we're not finding any larvae without these ants. And so if we were to do any type of translocation, we would need to make sure this ant species is found in the same site to allow for the half-moon larvae to succeed. Now, another important point is that these ants live at the base of the lupin. They live around the roots, and they farm not only these half moons, but they farm other species such as other types of butterflies. They also farm aphids, and they farm leafhoppers. So the ants are very industrious little workers that protect a wide range of biodiversity around the lupins. And so I'll play that video one more time, and you can see the ants, cleaning and working on the larvae, while the larvae just kind of chill out there. And again, this is really cool, especially for someone who really loves ants like me. Another thing we found is that when we've been looking at the host species for the larvae of plants, we found that they only use silvery lupin. They've maybe 1 or 2 have been found on the silky lupin, but the silver lupin is the main host. And we've noticed that ones with larger amount of stems usually have more larvae. And what that tells us is the older a plant is, the more likely it's to have half-moon hairstreak larvae. And here again is a picture of the larva. Here's a picture of there's an ant on it. And then you can see in this right here where the larva is eating a new shoot that's coming up. And we think that the silvery lupin is the main target for the as a food plant for the half-moon hairstreak because it has so many of those stems. It makes a really good food plant. Now we've also had some problems in the field, as everyone does, because weather can play a very big role. In 2021, it was very hot and dry, and the first larvae we found was May 10th. It was dry, warm, and then this is a picture of May 9th in 2022, where there was snow, and we didn't find our first larvae until May 20th. So this year was a very fun field season with lots of strange weather, and my field techs were always complaining because if I ever came down, it rained. I went down 7 times to Waterton for helping my field techs out, and every single time it snowed or rained. So the field season this year was a little bit different, and that wet and cold plays a really important role in a different set of things as well with when we're doing adult surveys, and I'll talk about that in a few seconds. So when we're doing adults, we're looking for the small dollar-sized butterfly, and sometimes there's lots of them and some there's not, but we walk along those transects and we count. And we do point counts where we walk along and we see an adult butterfly flying, or maybe it's sitting on a flower like this, and we record a bunch of different variables such as the weather, if it's windy, what the butterfly is doing. So if we saw this butterfly, it would be nectaring. But it might be mating. It might be just sunning itself on a plant. So they'll often face the way the sun is so they can gain the heat. And so there's a lot of different observations we tried to observe. And one of the cool observations we learned this year is that they seem to mate later in the afternoon when it's the hottest. but we still haven't actually been able to observe egg laying after spending hours and days of watching them, observing them, following them around. And that might mean that they're laying the eggs more later in the night or really early in the morning when we haven't been out on the fan. And so that's something we need to do and look at more in the next field season. Now, there's been varying numbers reported in the last few years, and this is just up till last year that we've got counts. And so in 2014, there were 260 reported, and then we didn't have any reports until a year after the fire. The fire occurred in 2017, and then 2018 we only had 6 observed, and then 126, and it increased all the way up to 747 last year. Now, this may be a little bit of sampling bias. Last year, we did every single transect. We had multiple people out there counting, and so we may have gotten more counting, more individuals observed last year compared to other years. But it seemed to be a good year last year. This year, I'm still cleaning the data to make sure we don't have any duplicate data from uploading different data collections. But it seems like we have less than that 747. So last year was a good year because it was warm and dry, and it allowed the butterflies to succeed. Now, weather, again, like I said, plays an important role. And this hits again, like last year was a hot, dry summer, and they first emerged on July 6th, and we stopped seeing them on July 21st. So they flew for 15 days. Well, this year, they didn't start flying until July 20th, and they ended August 9th. So there's about 20 days of flight in there. So this tells us that there's important phenological ability to adapt to the differing types of weather that exists in the park. But it also means that when you're doing observations and you're trying to learn about this population, we need to take into effect that weather has a big impact on when and where the butterflies fly. And so this is, again, another variable we have to take into account while we're doing the monitoring. So then that brings us to potential translocation sites if we were to set up a secondary population through assisted colonization. And of the 4 sites we surveyed in the park, only one had similar topography and had silvery lupin, and that was Stony Flats. And the funny thing is that Stony Flats is on the opposite side of the river from Blakiston Creek. So it has good habitat, it has the right species of ants, it has the right species of lupin, it seems to have the right type of geology, but there are no butterflies there. And we're not sure why, but one of the things is these small butterflies don't seem to fly very far, so they must not be very good at dispersal. So we may look at this area and go, maybe this is a good site to set up a secondary population as a protected area so that if anything happens to the main one, we have this backup population. So we'll be doing more of this work and more analysis of this site next year as well. Now, we've also done a lot of genetic work. Most of this genetics work happened last year, but some of it did this year. And we've analyzed the full genome of the Waterton specimens and population. And it has one of the cool things. It has one of the biggest butterfly genomes ever recorded. So it's this tiny little butterfly with a gigantic genome, lots of DNA pairs and everything like that. And we've also collected specimens from BC and Montana and hoping to expand on that in the next year. And this informs us on the population diversity, what the diversity is within populations. So is Waterton an inbred population, or is it like greatly reduced in genetic diversity? And it also tells us the uniqueness of Waterton Lake, the Waterton Lake population. And so preliminary results right now indicate that the Waterton population is relatively unique to the point where it's not sharing it's not transferring genetics between other populations, and it's very isolated. So instead, if we were to introduce or try and do wild-to-wild translocation to reinforce this population, there could be issues because they're genetically so divergent. And this is important for us to know because it means we need to focus on conserving the population we have instead of trying to reinforce it from elsewhere. And this kind of goes back to looking at the half moon in British Columbia, and immediately you actually get an idea of why there's might be also differences between the two populations. British Columbia and most of the rest of the habitat for half-moon hairstreak looks like the picture on the left. It's mountainous, it's got sagebrush plus lupins and erigonum. In Alberta, there is no sagebrush in this habitat area, the Blakiston Fan. And so right there's a huge difference. The other difference is that you can just the topography. It's a very flat area that we have half moons on in Alberta, but in BC and the rest of its range going into the United States, it's usually found on these kind of hillsides that are higher up in elevation and a little bit more hilly with a lot more sagebrush found. And so there's already differences between the populations just on what they're using as habitat. Additionally, in BC, the half moons come out earlier, late June to July. Now, this might not be an issue. This might just be like because of the weather. It's warmer in southern BC versus Waterton. But in Waterton, they come out in July to August. And then they also use different lupin species. In BC, caterpillars eat the silky lupin. In Alberta, they seem to be using the silvery lupin. We also don't know the ant species that the half moon is using in BC, but in Alberta, it's that Lasius ponderosae, and it's the only ant species it seems to associate with particularly. So these are big differences if we were to try and translocate from this area, and is a red flag to try and reinforce from this area as well. So you take the genetics plus all these different associations, and it means this is probably not where we want to take from. Now, we also have the issue of British Columbia, the populations are endangered. And this picture here is actually the most northerly spot you will find half moons in Canada. And it's this one hill at White Lake Research Ranch in British Columbia, and it's only found on this hill. The rest of the site, it looks like exactly the same, but you can't find it. It's restricted to this one little hill in the entire area. So there's a lot of other issues we need to learn about if we were to try and even do any type of conservation within BC or any translocations at all. So what's next for 2023? What are we doing next year? Well, we're going to continue monitoring the Waterton population and probably expand on certain things like looking at habitat use, and we're going to try and find how the females lay eggs. We're going to do additional surveys for potential assisted colonization sites outside the park. There's one just outside the park owned by the Nature Conservancy that other butterfly experts have thought that half moons might be found there, but they're not because it's very similar habitat. We want to do more genetic surveys in the United States so we can understand the population dynamics and make sure that the Waterton population is super unique before we do any type of translocation testing of any sorts. And we might also want to start looking at the BC populations to learn more about them. There are potentially 8 known populations, and only 6 have had reported butterflies in the last few years. So a few of those populations may have become extirpated. And we want to also learn about what the answer the larvae are associated with, and what other types of what plants might be important for them in BC. So I just wanted to thank all the generous donors and collaborators that have provided funding and support for this work. And thank you all for supporting wildlife conservation. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thanks for that excellent presentation, James. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat now, or use the reactions menu to select the hand raise icon if you'd like to be called upon to ask your questions. Start with some from the chat if we have some. Doesn't look like there's anything in there yet.
I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I'm sure someone has something to ask. That was an awesome presentation. I learned a ton myself. So thank you, James.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, there's one question. Are there any
Any
predators for this species, fish or birds?
Yeah, so predator-wise, on the fan, there are a lot of birds, sparrows and uh, warblers and stuff that fly through. For probably sparrows would be the main predator, but there are mountain bluebirds sometimes. But there are also other ant species that don't make symbiotic relationships with it. Those could be beetles. And then we found this year one that was parasitized by a techniid fly. So it's a type of fly that lays its eggs on caterpillars, and then the larvae eat the caterpillar from the inside out. So those are the different types of predators. As adults, birds would be the main thing, and then dragonflies. We've seen dragonflies catch a few here and there.
Awesome. That was a great answer. We have another question here in the chat. Any idea why they enjoy the lupin flower in particular? Any other flowering plant that they like or lay eggs around?
Yeah, so they only lay eggs on lupins, and in Alberta, they seem to only lay eggs on the silvery lupins. So it's very restricted, and that's just what the larvae are able to digest, and it's just how they've evolved. And there are a lot of silvery lupins on the fan, so it's a very good food source because there's so many of them.
Very, very interesting. Another question we have here is, will the hay/grassland area burned in the fire return to its more natural plants, or will they return to be hay?
Yeah, so that area that used to be hayed, it's still a taller grassland area versus the shorter grassland on the other side, and that might be more to do with the soil type. And so it was a good area to grow hay because it had a good soil area, and now it's just kind of a taller grassland, and that's means it's poor for um, the Erigonum, the buckwheat, and it's also poor for a lot of lupins. So you get a lot more silky lupins in that area versus the silvery. So is it going to be returned to more natural? More work needs to be done to figure out if that is its natural state or not.
Very interesting. Final question that we have here in the chat. Feel free to ask more people. There's still time. How does climate change figure into considerations for relocation or assisted migration?
Yeah, so climate change is an interesting issue. Obviously, we're at the northern extent of this population, so if it warms up, it might actually be beneficial in some ways. However, climate change brings its own issues such as severe weather, and that can be a negative effect. So we are looking at how climate may affect this in the future, but we don't have any results of that yet. But it's kind of there's climate change can take with one hand and give with another depending on the species.
Yeah, climate change is definitely something affecting all research projects nowadays.
Yeah.
Here's another really good question. Are park visitors a hazard to the butterfly in this small range?
So in a way, yes, and in a way, no. If you do respectful hiking, follow on the trails, make sure your shoes are clean. So they have actual shoe cleaning areas that you can wipe your shoes off on. It means that you are protecting it the best you can. If you're running off the main paths and pulling up flowers and everything like that, then that's a problem. But for the most part, if you're respectful of the trails, then no, it's pretty good.
That's definitely good to know. Another question that we have here, I guess for some people that have not visited the park, what is the Blakiston Fan that you referred to? Is that a geological term?
Yeah, so it's an alluvial fan. So the Blakiston Fan's actually, sorry, I probably need to explain it a little bit more. It's a creek that runs through the mountains. It comes out into the flat area of Waterton, and so it used to run a lot higher and faster probably, and so it created this alluvial fan within the valley. And so it has a mixture of geology that where there's like lots of larger rocks, and then where the creek runs now, it's like kind of gravelly. But then there's older creek beds that are no longer being used by the creek, so they're filled in and they're older, and so those have some of them are very silty, and that's where sometimes you find the best half-moon populations. But yeah, Blakiston fan, I call it that because it's an alluvial fan. That's a geological term. Yeah.
Are there other hairstreak species in Waterton that are competing for resources?
So there are other hair streaks in Waterton, but they come out at different times. And there's also other like canid butterflies, which are the family of butterflies. But I wouldn't say competing for resources is a big issue, mostly because the half moon spends all its time at the very base of the lupins, where most of the other butterflies actually spend all their time on the top of the lupins, eating some of them actually eat the flower buds, and others eat the actual leaves that once they're open. So they're using different parts of these lupins. And definitely in last year, some of the lupins looked very haggard after being eaten by all these different larvae. But they're able to the lupin plant itself seems to be resilient against this, and probably there's some benefit actually to being eaten that way, because you send off more shoots, and it also creates frass from all these caterpillars eating it, so they re-fertilize the soil and stuff like that.
Very interesting. So we still have a few more minutes if people want to ask questions. Oh, there's one right there. Is it common for butterflies to alter flight times with the weather, or does that tend to depend on the species?
So I'm not an expert on a lot of different butterflies, but butterflies definitely can alter when they emerge depending on weather. So part of their incubation process, where they go from a larvae to a pupa and then hatch out of the pupa into a butterfly, can really depend on how warm it is. So it takes shorter time if it's warmer, and takes longer when it's cooler. And some butterflies are more adapted to that, and they won't be affected the same. And others, if it's cool, might take a longer time. And that's what we're seeing with this half-moon hairstreak. It's a population that most is found in warmer areas. It's kind of greatly isolated in Waterton, and so it seems to be affected greatly by those weather changes versus some other species that aren't affected as much. Yeah. But
Very unique butterfly.
this year, I know a lot of people who studied butterflies said that they were behind by a few weeks for the most part, just because it was so much cooler during the start of the summer.
Sounds like they're very cool butterflies. Is there a benefit to the butterfly post wildfires? More micronutrients, richer soil, etc.?
Yeah, so that was predicted as one of the things, is that if the butterfly survived, which it did, that the fire actually potentially helped reduce the amount of knapweed, but also spotted knapweed, but also increased the growth rate on lupins. Now, spotted knapweed seems to be coming back pretty fast, but the lupins recovered from the fire and seem to be doing well after the fire. So it does help. And fire might be a good way of helping regulate the fan and making it healthier. But we have to figure out how it affects the half moon, and where you're going to burn, so you don't destroy all the larvae.
Very cool, very cool. So there's one more question in here. What is the main thing that is threatening the hair streak?
Yeah, so the main thing that's threatening the hair streak in Alberta is probably the spotted knapweed, and the reduction of the habitat in on the fan where they're found. It's such a small area that when you reduce the amount of host plants, such as the nectar plants like the lupins, or like the yellow buckwheat, or you're reducing the lupins, that can have a big impact on the amount of butterflies you can have on the landscape. Now in BC, it's totally different. The main issue is land use. So in BC, a lot of the population has been reduced because of overgrazing, or of turning what used to be hair streak habitat into wineries or orchards. So there's different issues that are affecting the different populations, and another reason that we need to maybe manage these populations differently.
Very interesting, very interesting. Any other questions from anyone else? We still have another couple minutes here. They've been great questions so far. All right, well, if there's no more questions, I think we'll start to wrap it up. Thanks for all the great questions, everyone. We're going to close the session now. Oh, I guess we could slide that one in really quick. What's their average lifespan? A season?
Yeah, so the average lifespan, like I said, the adults only live up to 12 days. Usually they live 6 to 8 days. So they have a really short lifespan, and they spend most of their lives as an egg. So they die at the end of their season, and then the eggs hatch the next spring in April or May, and then they are caterpillars for 4 months. So they spend 7 months of their year as an egg. So again, that's another big issue when you're trying to conserve something, is we need to understand what's going on with those eggs, and we don't actually have any idea.
Oh, wow. Very good final question there.
Yeah.
So we want to thank everyone again for joining us today. Thanks so much to James and our planning and tech team. Be sure to join us tomorrow at noon for a great presentation from Eric Peterson on grizzly bear use of army cutworm moth aggregations in Glacier National Park. Very, very interesting. We're very interested in your feedback as well from the webinar audio and video quality. Please feel free to share your comments or additional questions on this presentation with us at crownrlc@nps.gov. We'll add that to the chat just so everyone can see that. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.